Hi, everybody. This is Christopher Phillips, Executive Director of Democracy Cafe, democracycafe.org. We have 500 regular Democracy Cafe gatherings around the world. Jeff, our latest burgeoning of groups, Jeff Sachs is the head of the UN Sustainable Solutions Network, renowned sustainable development expert and author of one of my favorite books ever, the classic The End of Poverty. There's a movement. There is actually an opening in these dark times. Cornel West in the foreword to my new book, Soul of Goodness, called these catastrophic times. But there's openings, there's windows where people are really looking to be open to other perspectives, even if and as they remain entrenched in their own view. But I see in the
Let's hope
U.S.
so. Let's hope so.
Well, I was thinking about your April 22nd letter that was written by the UN Sustainable Solutions Network. And you're basically, it's not shrill, it's not contrarian, but it's counterintuitive. You're calling for a negotiated peace at a time when nobody seems to want to talk.
You know, wars are horrific, dangerous, escalatory, and this one in Ukraine is no exception to that. And they should be ended as rapidly as possible. And the idea that they're going to be ended by some decisive victory on the battlefield, especially the way that the US and unfortunately Ukraine has put it, that we're going to defeat Putin and defeat Russia on the battlefield, is from that point of view wishful thinking, and I don't think it's going to work. And so what we're calling for is back to the negotiating table for Russia, Ukraine. I think the United States needs to be there because we're one of the protagonists in this drama. And I do believe there is a negotiated solution to this, although it's getting harder and harder with each passing day, I have to say. Why is it getting harder and harder? Because in the war, Russia is taking territory, and whether it gives up that territory in a negotiation process becomes more difficult. Before the war, and there was no territorial conquest, I said, don't have a war, negotiate key issues like NATO enlargement, which has really bothered me from the start, because I think it's one of the provocations of this war. When the war broke out, I said, stop it now before it gets too late. And there was actually movement towards negotiation at the end of March. And then Ukraine actually pulled out of the negotiations, really. They gave a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons, it seems, was that their backer, the United States, and more generally NATO, told them, you can win. You don't have to negotiate your way out of this thing. I don't think that's happening. We sent a letter from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Leadership Council to all of the UN member states that said, get the UN member states behind negotiation. You don't have to choose sides. You have to say to both parties, go to the negotiating table, operate according to the UN Charter, respect the security interests of both parties of this conflict, and find a way to have peace. By the way, respecting the security interests of both sides of this conflict is taken as almost as an anathema in the United States. How can you say that Russia has any security interests in this conflict? But they do. They don't like NATO expansion. And if I were in Russia's situation, I wouldn't either. And that doesn't mean that I love or approve what Russia has done. Quite the contrary. But it does mean that I understand the context of this war, and I think, therefore, a way out of it as well.
Your view is nuanced in an age of thinking in black and white. I'm not seeing your many nuanced views presented, even in publications like the New York Times. I mean, there seems to be almost, a drumbeat. Ukraine good, Russia bad.
I can tell you, I write a lot of op-eds, as you know. I've had a harder time just even getting the op-eds published right now because the media editors and publishers have taken sides. So it's not as if there aren't some nuanced views around. It's that those who publish views in the mass media don't necessarily want to publish these views. When I've tried to write about negotiation, I've been accused of being anti-Ukraine or that I'm taking Putin's line. This is absolutely not the case. And you just have to read what I write to know that it's not the case. But that's where the black and white attitudes come in. Not that people don't have, some people have the more nuanced view and trying to understand both causes of the conflict in a somewhat deeper way. Also, I like to listen to what the Russians are saying, read the statements, hear the views, because I want to know the context, not just to be told, don't listen, it's all propaganda, it's all lies and so forth. This is not the way that we're going to end conflicts or stop the risks of very dire escalation. We need to listen to the other side. That makes a huge difference.
I remember when I was in elementary school, we had to practice crouching under our desks. This was in the fairly early 60s because of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the ramifications of that. I remember you writing in the April 22nd statement that the survival of humanity is at stake. And so a lot of people will think, well, that's shrill, but we're dealing with a major nuclear power. And it made me hark back to those days when I cowered under my desk at elementary school. Are we almost there again without being too dark about it?
Well, look, first of all, we should learn from the Cuban Missile Crisis when all of us, I was in elementary school in second grade. I remember those days vividly because of how terrified my parents were. And I didn't understand the full context, but I knew that this was very frightening. And that crisis almost led to a full-scale nuclear war. And if Kennedy had listened to the vast preponderance of his advisors who were saying military solution, we would have had a full-scale nuclear war. Kennedy saved the world by doing something different. He spent each day in that crisis asking, what is my counterpart, Nikita Khrushchev, thinking? And he was the only one in that environment asking that question. The others were asking a different question. How do we take out these missiles? So what kind of sorties to fly? When will the military be ready? When is the strike force ready? How big should it be? Kennedy alone in the group, save one advisor, Adlai Stevenson, was asking the question, what is Khrushchev doing? Why did he do this? What is he thinking? And by having that empathetic approach, which doesn't mean you agree with the other side, you just try to understand the other side. Kennedy reasoned his way to a compromise solution, which was, you remove your missiles, we will remove our missiles from Turkey, which are just on the Soviet border. And that was the deal that allowed the crisis to unwind peacefully. And we should learn from that 60 years on that you don't just vilify the other side. You don't just look to defeat the other side. You need to think, what is the other side saying? And you can't take the view. It's almost always a mistake to take the view, well, they're beasts. They're not even human. They're irrational. They're just violent. Everything they say is a lie, which is a pretty common response to Russia right now, for example. I think it's a wrong response. I think it's an incorrect response as well as an unhelpful way to get out of this mess. But I also think that it is incorrect, because I personally think that Russia has some points that we need to address, the most important of which is NATO enlargement into the Black Sea region, something which I don't support in any event. Even if it weren't for this war, I would say, don't push NATO right up to Russia's nose. That can't be safe for me as an American. I don't want that. But our military and our security state don't think in those terms. They think take the territory you can get, take the advantages you can get, and I think that gets us into trouble.
No, I think and again, the language you use, that it puts us at the knife's edge by adding those, and Erdogan is being painted as a pariah for not going along.
Yeah, if you have such a black and white view of everything, you find out, well, you can't really trust your allies. I mean, Erdogan is part of NATO, and then suddenly, no, we he's not really part of NATO. We can't rely on him, and so forth. You lose all the nuance, and everything becomes us versus them. It's a very dangerous mode of thinking. Also, when you're in us versus them, the adrenaline is flowing. You're in that agitated state. You got to move. You got to take them on. You got to fight them. You got to stand up to them. And that is a deeply evolutionary mode of response. But we know that it can lead to disaster for both sides, because games of chicken or direct confrontations can leave everybody vastly worse off. And now we're talking about nuclear superpowers.
So it's been a month and 5 days since the UN Sustainable Solutions Network came out with that statement. We're many steps back from where we were then. What can we do right here and now? That might do so.
What's happening right now is, at least for the moment, Russia is taking more territory on the ground. It is seemingly completing the conquest of Lugansk and Donetsk, and possibly all of the Donbass as it moves westward. Now, there are different voices being raised. Some are saying, stop this. This is dangerous, and we don't want and can't afford to aim for that ultimate victory. Kissinger has said as much in recent days. There are voices of escalation. The US is reportedly on the verge of sending longer range artillery, which, by the way, could mean that Ukraine would be shooting into Russia, thereby opening the chance of a full escalation of this war even farther. There are voices of at least one US general that says we should bust the Soviet bottleneck or blockade of Odessa. That could be direct war between the United States and Russia. And there are glimmers that Ukraine might be realizing also that the negotiating table may be the prudent position. Zelensky said just hours before we're speaking that though Ukrainians don't want to have him meet with Putin, maybe it's going to be necessary to do so. An interesting statement, I think correct, but it's after weeks of a lot of bravado. We're going to win. We're going to push them out. We don't need to talk to them until they're defeated. And maybe there's a different attitude because of so-called facts on the ground as the Russian military has been advancing in the Donbass. Of course, there's lots of talk about a big counterattack based on US weaponry and so forth. I've been skeptical of this defeat Russia view all along, and I continue to be skeptical of it.
And your other 2 points are that sanctions don't work, and that the overwhelming majority of the world population is keeping this at arm's length. This is not, for tacit and expressed reasons that this is making our lives doubly difficult. In Mexico, where I spend a great deal of time, the basic cost of basic staples is soaring. I mean, my
Yes.
wife, yeah.
So, the idea here has been that U.S. weapons, Ukrainian resolve to fight, and U.S. and European economic sanctions is the victory combination. And I've been really skeptical of that package as being anywhere close to sufficient. I've also argued in general, I don't even get it, because if in fact that package was enough to push Putin into a corner of, outright military defeat with conventional forces, the escalation to tactical nuclear weapons seems to me would be absolutely possible and horrific. So I haven't understood the logic of this game of escalation, or this war of attrition, or whatever you want to call it, to begin with. But on the specific points, I've argued that the sanctions don't really work very well in terms of changing behavior of the sanctioned country. But in this case, like you say, unlike sanctions against Venezuela, or sanctions against Iran, or sanctions against North Korea, the sanctions against Russia have a huge boomerang effect, because they're absolutely causing economic hardship around the world. And that is a little different from the sanctions against a smaller country. So I've always been a skeptic that we're going to get much mileage on this. And I would say, given where we are months into this war, nothing has assuaged my skepticism.
Where would we maybe, I know hindsight's 2020, but if we had implemented your Marshall Plan in 1991, the shock therapy,
Yeah.
where might we be today?
30 years ago was a long time, but you can believe that early moments of a deep crisis make a difference. I always looked back to the debacle after World War I with the Versailles Treaty, because I am intellectually a student of John Maynard Keynes, who in 1919 wrote the book Economic Consequences of the Peace, to protest the harsh terms of the Versailles settlement, saying that this would really crush the German economy and also lead to unrest throughout Europe. And it was prescient. But one of the things that the whole milieu helped to create was the conditions of a hyperinflation in Germany in 1923. And when it came to Russia in 1991 and onward, or even the Soviet Union the year before that, I was saying, avoid a financial crisis that deepens that way, learn the lessons of 1919. And I don't think we learned very many lessons. I advocated a major financial program of help for Russia. I think the White House a little bit laughed. Who is this kid? Because I was a kid then. Who is this kid telling us where to spend our money against an opponent? After all, we just won. Why should we throw money at them? They're on their knees. That's great. Well, that was the triumphalist attitude of Cheney and Wolfowitz in the Defense Department of Bush 1. And it was really not the right approach. It did deepen the economic crisis in Russia in 1992-93. The reformers couldn't keep their foothold in those years. Politics went sour. I got out early because nothing I was saying was being implemented or was practical when the US had a very different point of view. And I wouldn't draw, a deterministic line from those days to today, but I would say at every step of a deepening challenge, we had many off-ramps, many ways to make things better. We didn't choose very many of them. And even as late as 2020, and I should say 2021 in the first year of the Biden presidency, I think we had an off-ramp to this conflict by negotiating the non-enlargement of NATO, but Biden didn't want to take that route.
I bet you must be facing some opprobrium even from peers for the stance you're taking right now.
Well, I could say my Ukrainian colleagues are not thrilled. They think I'm singing Putin's line. I think the US government, I don't know if they're listening or hearing, but they wouldn't be too happy with what I'm saying, because I don't think this is a successful foreign policy at all. But let me tell you, I'm, of course, speaking to leaders around the world, and there's a lot of resonance in this, and a lot of resonance with leaders in Europe. And I've been in Africa, in Latin America recently, talking on these issues, and there's really a lot of resonance. So I don't feel alone in this by any means, but it doesn't make everybody happy.
Right, but it's setting back the Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, look, war is the enemy of any kind of peaceful construction of a better world. And when I started advising Kofi Annan on the Millennium Development Goals, well, we had 9/11 and the US global war on terror. We know how that worked out in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya. Oh my God. And that was a huge distraction. And now we are not only facing the direct costs of this war, and Ukraine facing them the most, the rest of the world facing the fallout, but we're distracted once again from the kind of long-term building that we need to be doing for a sustainable, just society. And that's what wars do. Terrible.
Jeff, can we extrapolate from this and look at what's happening in the United States right now? The vilification and demonization of the other, is that preventing any sorts of solutions to the endemic problems that we're facing, from everything from gun control to vaccine inequality?
I think a lot of us feel something is really, really haywire in our politics right now. So the outward manifestations are a foreign policy that is not solving problems or settling issues, but is itself provocative and destabilizing. And it seems to be linked to our internal disarray. This is a country that had an insurrection on January 6th, 2021. This is a country that had in my view, a psychopathic president under Trump, a country where our elementary school kids are being shot up. And by the way, and the police don't even know how to respond. It's a situation that's unimaginable, and we're going to be torn to shreds by a Supreme Court decision soon. We're really in a bad way because we're also not solving problems internally. And yesterday, Antony Blinken gave a speech about attitudes towards China. One thing in the speech that was right was to say, if we really want to confront a challenger, we need to get our own house in order and our own act together. But a lot of the things that Blinken said at that point about investing more in education and science and so forth, is it going to happen with our society so divided? It's very, very worrisome. And we really need a different approach to our politics. And it's worrisome that our institutions maybe are part of the problem, in that the primary system within our parties seems to be pulling people to more extreme directions. Often it seems that the money in politics is so corrupting that we can't get anything done. And so it's very worrisome. And I think all of us as Americans should be really saying, tone down the external stuff.
Right.
We've got to solve our problems here.
Right.
Let's have some calm. Let's not have so many enemies outside. Let's not take on this global stuff. Let's heal ourselves and find some common ground, because we really need it.
I keep thinking we need a statesman like that true profile and courage himself, John F. Kennedy, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Somebody who tells us what we may not want to hear, but
Kennedy told us in June 1963, which was a speech that was so wonderful. I wrote a book about it, that I felt just compelled to write a book about it, to move the world, JFK's quest for peace. And it was the post-Cuban Missile Crisis period when Kennedy said we need to find a way forward that's peaceful. And in his speech in 1963, June 10, people should listen to it. It's online. You could listen to the beautiful cadences and the inimitable words. It's a speech not directed towards the Soviet Union saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's a speech to the American people, incredibly saying, we Americans need to change our attitudes. Isn't that incredible? When does a president not tell the other, you have to do this, you have to do that, but say to the American people, we have to change our own attitudes, because we have to realize peace is possible, but it depends also on us. And that's the whole gist of the speech. It's wondrous. And those are the kinds of words we need to hear today.
And we're hearing them from you.
Well, we need to hear it from our leaders.
Yeah, I consider you one of them. I thank you so much for your time, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, revered professor at Columbia University. My go-to book is always your book, The End of Poverty, but I'll do everything I can to help get the word out, and hopefully it'll get people at least talking.
Great to be with you. And we are talking, and like you say, all over the world, people are talking. We can find a way forward.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.